No, I didn't get to hear him.
Okay, he doesn't have his microphone on, but he said he's doing good.
That's okay.
Yeah, just full disclosure, right now, like I said, it's just the three of us. We may have some more people join us in the physical space. We may have some more people join us in the Zoom room, but even if nobody does, we'll still get all these questions laid out, and we'll still be able to post it all on the social media so that people can come in and view it after, and we'll make sure there's a stronger turnout for the focus group for sure.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. But all right, let me know when you're ready, Nas, recording, streaming, and all that, and we can go ahead and get started. We're good. We're live. Oh, great, great, great. Well, I should have done this way earlier then. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of Mumbo Jumbo Community Conversations. My name is Chinyelu Umar Africa. I'll be our conversation facilitator today, as we're joined by a longtime friend, community member, and scholar in the Kepler community, Miss Dominique Edwards, uh, pursuing a PhD, correct?
I am.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Pursuing a PhD, and we're here to learn a little bit more about her PhD research, and how we can support more of that work going into the future. So, um, we'll definitely get deep into all of that in a second, but of course, we got to start off with our check-in. For anybody that's watching this, maybe via YouTube or even just like watching the recording in the future, who may not be familiar with the Kepra community culture and the way that we do things, we like to start all of our formal gatherings, and that's just a little ritual that we practice to make sure that we're maintaining an awareness of each other, awareness of ourselves, and basically just, maintaining that understanding of, what everybody needs in community and what we can do to take care of each other. So, typically, what that looks like is we'll do a number and color, and then we'll have a sort of like icebreaker question as well that's designed to, you know, get us learning about each other on a more qualitative level. So, sometimes that question is something like, "What's your favorite color?" Something deep, like, I think one that we had recently, it was about like, oh yeah, like people's personal definitions of violence. So, but today I think we'll keep it maybe a little bit lighter, maybe something in line with the topic. I'm thinking maybe for today we can do like number, color, and um uh, here's a question based off of what I know right now about Dominique's research, which is what is uh yeah, maybe just like in a few words, what's the connection between land ownership and liberation to you? So, yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe a little, maybe a little out there, but we'll do our best. Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Show everybody how it's done. Um, feeling like a radiation green right now. Feeling like an 8. It's been a pretty good day. Pretty productive day. Um, and then for me, I think, oh, oh, excuse me, don't know. But for me, I think the connection between land ownership or stewardship, as another way to put it, and liberation has to basically do with sovereignty. And this idea of just being able to decide for yourself, you know, and for your community to decide for itself, how you want to live life, how you want to navigate the world. And I think that, at least the way that our current political system is set up, land ownership is one of the big ways that people gain the, you know, the right to do that for themselves. The right to self determination, I think, is very much tied to land ownership and, has been for a long time in a lot of cultures. And I will pass it to you, Dominique.
I think I'm feeling maybe like a yellowish orange kind of, it's fall, it's autumn. Fall is my favorite season. And I'm about at like 7.5 today, if that's a good number. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's how I'm feeling. I feel pretty good.
Hell yeah. And then your take on that question of the connection between land ownership and liberation.
So my take on that is that, and kind of a little bit about me, I'm sure we'll get into that, but I consider
Mhm.
myself as a land steward. I don't own land, but I have access to land. I work that land
Yeah.
in community with others to produce and distribute fresh food to those who have been systematically excluded. And so land stewardship for me is um, exactly the concepts that you said. It is about giving rise to sovereignty, is about self-sufficiency, self-determination. And so when I was, I think maybe, I'm not sure how old you are now, but
24.
you, okay, so I was about this. So when I came to Kepra, I was about your age. And was just learning those concepts. But when I came to Capra, you were much younger. And so you have been able to be more in, you know, being raised within the Capra community in such a powerful way. And so I had not been operating in a decolonial or indigenous praxis just yet. I was just starting to get my feet wet, learning about self sufficiency and self determination when I was your age now. And so now I'm much older. Um, so yeah. So you
Fantastic.
were a
Thank you very
tiny
much.
tot. I think you and your sister, you were a tiny tot hustling folks at the chess
Yeah.
table. So
Yeah. She was I think she was always she tended to be a little bit better at the chess than so she was the one hustling. I was just learning. Oh, but yeah. And then we'll pass it back behind the screen to Nas real quick to do your check-in as well. Hear me? I think that's well. How you doing? I feel like eight and deep purple today. And then could you say the question one more time? Yeah, the connection between land ownership and liberation. In my opinion, my humble opinion, my 20 years on this earth, my view of how land ownership and liberation connect is that land ownership gave access or gave the ability for people to feel security, or in some cases in history, the first time in their lives, gave them make choices based off of their based from a place of control over their environment. They were able to feed themselves how they like. They were able to farm how they choose, and create community how they would like, and also maybe have the choice of going to other places and owning land. And having that choice in itself is a huge um, milestone in human history. Uh, but I would just say, from a security standpoint, and that ability to securely have a safe home is something that changes your worldview. And there was a time in history that wasn't the case, and there was a time that there was. And I believe like it's important to take note of the differences and such. But that's my view. That's where I'm at in that conversation, and I'll pass it back to the facilitator. Thank you, Naj. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And we if folks join us here in the room, if folks join us on the Zoom, we'll wait for the natural pauses in the dialogue to allow them to do their check-in as well. But for now, I would love to dive in a little bit. And yeah, I think that a good place to start, even going back before you first came into contact with Kepra, Dominique, but just your story, how you got to be, where you are today, and I think like basically like what started you down this path. So yeah, however you wanna take that.
so my story is very interesting. So but I for a long time I always used to say that I came into this work because my father taught me how to grow food. But the other caveat or element to that is that my father specifically taught me how to grow food the summer that my mother passed away, with her complications with long-standing complications with diabetes. And so, just like I said, you're 24 now, but I didn't learn how to grow food or come back to the land until I was 22. And now I'm in my big grown age, right? And so that was about 15 or so years ago. And so this has been a very long journey. And so I was just telling one of my soil sisters earlier that I don't want to be considered as an expert in what I do anymore. So some folks will refer to me as, an expert in some of this work, but I don't want to be an expert anymore because I feel that that means that my journey and learning is done, and that I have, learned everything that I need to learn about this. But to be fair, I feel like more so over the past 3 years of doing this research now, and more so just very embedded in the ground over the past year of connecting with growers and folks that look like us in this space, I have a way much more to learn. And so my research started off as kind of like a pilot project. And so I knew I specifically wanted to connect with Black farmers in Indiana to collect our stories, to understand what it is that drives us, to understand how we have been very resilient, especially against oppressive structures, white supremacy, and all of the things that has kind of cut our throats over the past, over the generations, and has decreased our access to land. And I wanted to uh, continue to, and I want to continue to learn. So beyond, Dr. Edwards, beyond the PhD and whatnot. And so, and also continue to do this work from a much more decolonized lens that is rooted in ancestral and generational stories. So so my work ended up becoming not so much as even collecting stories, but ending up, what is my own story? And so I am still answering or coming around to answer the question myself of what does land access as liberation look like to me? And so it came to a boiling point for me, even like over the summer after, connecting with a colleague, that I was just really upset about a situation. And to me, it was not even that liberation and freedom wasn't a thing for us, but some of the barriers and the obstacles that was actually preventing us from being able to achieve that. And so that was a very much a turning point in my learning in regards to this. And so I am kind of leading this work from what's called the participant observer lens, right? So I'm in community and I'm also a participant that's a part of the project. And then I'm also utilizing some of the different models that are a part of, so I'm working on my PhD in community psychology for context. And so we have different theories such as indigeneity, decolonial praxis. And so those are the ways in which that I'm trying to lead this work, inform this work, but also give respect to those that what's called the loop model. So stories that are unheard, stories that are untold, stories that are untellable, and the stories that can't be told. And so keeping a lot of those things to my vest as well. So if folks want to outwardly pour out their story and they want their story to be told, absolutely. Like I want to be a part of that and I want to be a conduit for that. And then folks who still want to share their story, but they don't want it to be publicized, because I'm also trying to figure out what is the best way to share these stories and who wants their story to be told. There's elements of my story that I'm okay with sharing and other elements of my story that I don't want to be told, because it's been a very long journey of me getting here. And then what is the audience for that? Is it growers that look like us? Is it, maybe policymakers, things like that. So what is your audience? and then how powerful of a project is this? Can it even, does it even have the reins or the foundation to change policy, right? We know policy making, like policy is my love language. I don't know what your love languages are, but when it comes to, you know, trying to make structural changes and systemic changes, what are some of the things that need to take place that that supports us, that continues to support our community?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great place to start. I think I would love to, this piece around stories sounds like a big part of like, not only the work that you currently do, but also like your journey to get to this place. So I think maybe like my first question is like, what are some of the stories that you heard, you know, maybe starting, back at 22 when you were first sort of like coming into this like, awareness. What were some of the stories that you heard or that you connected with that, drove you to go deeper, you know?
I think some of the story, it wasn't even so much as the stories that I heard, but the experiences. So I ended up, realizing how powerful that gardening and growing food was. And so I wanted to share it more on a community level. And so I got into wanting to build a community garden. And I really couldn't figure out how to appropriately connect with the community to try to drive this work. And well, it's taken me, that amount of time to actually get into community gardening. And so, but it came at a time where my thinking was different. I realized, food systems inequities from a much deeper level at that point, and that community garden can be really more of a band-aid than an actual, um, how do you say, solution to food insecurity and food apartheid. And but I got a call during the pandemic, and somebody called me and said, "Hey, you've got this community garden that's actually down the street from you. We need some help." And so, hey, everybody was on lockdown, right? So we were, social distancing or, sitting in place. So I ended up taking over this community garden that I've managed now for almost 5 years. And I think that it's really hilarious how things just kind of end up coming full circle and making you and even humbling you, right? Because this has not been easy work. And so, but over the last couple of years, we have had the ability to create like free and amazing programming for our residents. We have a free biweekly farmers market. And for the last few short years, we have been able to distribute thousands of pounds of food directly into the hands of our residents. So this was something that wasn't happening previously. Folks were still able to access food, but the pandemic really shifted where it seemed like we all had to work in this emergency mode. Like everything had to be like fast, getting resources. Folks are sick, folks are losing their lives, they're losing their homes, their businesses, their jobs. And so this was the only thing that was really consistent and continues to be consistent for the residents that are in my community. Um, and so I wouldn't even say that it's even stories, but more so a culmination of different experiences. And so now this storytelling component is something very different that I think needed to happen for me as well as others to kind of open up some of the things that I was feeling, especially in regards to like that ancestral and generational piece. Like how do I move this? Why do I move this way? How do I move this way? And so some of the things that I've been exploring is also the spiritual side of things, that faith that is also connected to the land.
So I think like just trying to like play that back a little bit. I think what I'm hearing is that it was more your firsthand experience engaging in like the development of a community garden project as like a community development project that caused you to be like, hey, maybe there's something more here, you know, than what I originally thought.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I guess like from that, I'm wondering a little bit more to like what that shift in thinking like looked like for you, you know, like where did you start, you know, and then like where did you get to versus like where you are now, you know, sort of like a beginning, middle, and end in terms of like your well, end in quotation marks, of course. But you know, in terms of like your personal paradigm around like land access, you know, and like you know, I think like growing food as a part of that as well.
So, oh goodness. So, we know what my beginning was. So, and I actually noticed a pattern some years down the road when we lost another matriarch in our family, that it seemed that we had this natural, almost genetic memory, as what one of my project participants defines it, um, as like going back to land. And it seemed that we kind of sowed our grief into the land, and it came out as this like very healing, um this healing gesture, this healing kind of praxis, that I don't think that my father recognized, but I recognized it. And so, in the beginning, just kind of like, for me, it was very institutionalized, right? So kind of like being very connected to white-led agencies and organizations, because those are the only folks that it appeared, on the front end, that those are the only folks that, would validate you in the growing space. And that ended up not being true whatsoever, because we have organizations like Kepra that exist. And so, and I feel like Kepra really, it has been super foundational in a lot of my growing and experience, because Kepra leads from such a very decolonized praxis that is rooted in indigeneity, right? And Afrocentrism. And so folks need to, like us, need to be tied to organizations like Kepra, because it helps us with our foundation. And so, unfortunately, life happened, and life has been up and down for me. And so I wasn't able to stick with and stay with Kepra the way that I wish that I could have, because, hey, life is life, and things happen, right? But still, just like being able to lean on Miss Paulette or lean on M, and just like pop up and be like, I have this problem, or I have this thing that I need to figure out, or, how do I do this? And things like that. And so me, I'm really terrible about asking for help, for one. I will suffer in silence. I will not ask for help. And that is one of my biggest issues that I'm trying to get away from. Um, but I knew I could not do this particular work or have these type of conversations without Kepra. Kepra was my foundation. So I needed to understand, so that, so Kepra has been a part of that beginning, that middle, starting to be kind of be that end. And so, the long story short, in regards to, I went back to school to get my master's degree in, sustainable urban development. And so, because when I was trying to build these community gardens, I felt like I didn't have enough of that community development experience. And so, one of my professors, my research advisor at the time, asked me a very serious question that has been almost 10 years now. And I still remember that question of, why does the community need the garden? And so that's when my really my decolonizing process started, because I didn't realize that I myself was really kind of leading this work from not so much in community, not so much more of a desire of something that I wanted as an individual, rather than something that should have been led in community. So, I guess that's kind of like I hope that kind of answered where your
Yeah,
middle, your beginning, your end.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. You've mentioned a few times sort of like that terminology around like decolonizing, about being like rooted in indigeneity. I think first I would like to hear you maybe just like explain a little bit sort of like what those concepts mean, abstractly.
mm.
And then, maybe talk a little bit about, you know, how you see those things like manifesting as like, in the real world. Like, like you've talked about like praxis a few times as well. So like, how do you see those concepts of like decolonization and like indigeneity manifesting as, praxis or practice, you know?
So in regards to this particular work, I find it to be very much rooted in colonialism and settler colonialism, which we know has, given rise to genocide of indigenous peoples and things like that. And so, in order for us to kind of almost restore our own cultural practices and our own and being rooted back to the land ourselves, we almost have to go through this, this awakening, this part in our lives or this point in our lives where we have to unlearn. To me, I think it's also a process of unlearning, especially if you have been or navigated predominantly white institutions for a long time that tell you that this is who you are, this is how you should act, this is how you should be. But then those people, they don't look like you, right? They don't talk like you, they don't understand your family dynamics, they don't understand any of that. And so it's almost like you have to come and go through this process of learning. And to me, decolonization is learning and unlearning. So I'm unlearning all of these all of these very oppressive things that are within these oppressive white dominant structures and relearning what it is to me and what my identity is and how I am tied to land, how I am tied to place, how I'm tied to space, and how I navigate community. Praxis, just that, that the practice of these things. Um, Indigeneity, that more deep ancestral, cultural, generational piece is how I'm viewing indigeneity and also sovereignty.
Yeah, yeah. I That indigeneity piece is so interesting to me. And I'm gonna stop myself because I'm gonna tap back into that in a second. But I did want to ask, like, you mentioned like at the beginning of that last response, that a lot of food systems work is like rooted in settler colonialism. And I'm just curious if you could like maybe speak to how you see that, like, how does that like colonial mindset shape our current relationship to land and land, you know, okay, I'm gonna take one. Early during your check-in, you mentioned this difference between like land stewardship and land ownership. And I think that there's like a hint to like what I'm trying to get at there.
Mm.
So how does that like settler colonial mindset, that colonized mentality shape our current relationship to like land and land access and land stewardship? And then, when you're looking at it through a more decolonized indigenous lens, what's the difference there?
So for me, stewardship is being within having an actual almost communal relationship to land and the environment, everything that is there, right? I was actually having this really great conversation again with my soil sister earlier, where we discuss like she's an herbalist, and so I was discussing actually my gripe with how institutions will come and say that this particular plant here is invasive and we need to rip it out root and stem. And me, I'm like, well, what if that particular plant is is native or indigenous and it can be utilized as medicine? So not so, oh, what I find is that a lot of white led institutions will find that um, invasive species are just like very problematic. But indigenous people or native folks that are akin to this particular land historically used to utilize a lot of invasive species for medicinal purposes or ceremonial purposes. Um, and so it is, so in community psychology, we have a theory that's called indigenous ways of knowing. And so in some, that is basically looking at the ancestral relationship with the environment and indigenous peoples. And so, and also just having respect for all things that which includes land and all living beings, and then reciprocity as well. So, you know, how will my actions today impact future generations? Um, and how can we give back to the land? So, and a lot of those, you know, a lot of the methodology and a lot of the thinking in regards to I just need to go and rip this out instead of having a appropriate relationship with the land. How can this be beneficial to me? How can this be of use to me? Or something like that. So like in, for example, at my growing operation, we have a wooded area in the back of it. And so we've had people say, oh, I want to come and expand this garden. I'm going to rip all that out and we're going to take, no, 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 no. You're not going to touch nothing here. For one. Two, if you do rip all of that out, everything here that we are growing will die. Our only food source, our only fresh food source, I should say, in the community will cease to exist. So, you know, and again, folks that are leading from this very weird, so we know that we have been very disconnected from one. And it takes, I wouldn't say it takes a lot, but for some people, it takes a lot, like myself, it takes a lot to come back around to understand your relationship to land, to understand the relationship to every living creature and thing that creeps and crawls and whatnot. Like I'm in a lot of these different what do you call them? Facebook groups or whatever, you know, with different folks that are they just want to garden, but they don't like all the other things that come with gardens. They don't like the lizards, they don't like the snakes, they don't like the bugs, they don't like the, you know, whatever, what have you. And so um they're partway there. They got the concept, right? You know, like cool, yeah, we want to start growing our own food. But it takes a whole other journey and a whole other, I don't know, maybe reckoning to be like, okay, I have to accept everything that comes with being in the dirt and being connected to the land. That means I got to learn about, you know, all the creepy crawlies. I got to have a relationship with the things that creepy crawly, you know, et cetera, so on and so forth. So,
You can't just, you can't just take what you like and leave the rest. You got to take
right,
it.
right.
Yeah. How do you see that sort of, how do you see that approach and relationship with land and with nature? How do you see that translating into the way that, you know, people build relationships with other people, you know?
So I think that what I'm hearing is you're saying, how does your relationship with land, how does that connect to, say again?
Well, yeah, so it's more like, how does the mindset that like informs that relationship with land inform our relationship to like other people in our communities, because at least in my experience, uh growing food is a communal activity, and like I think that in engaging in that activity and in developing like a relationship to the land, you develop a relationship, you work the land with, you know but I think that like, you know yeah, so actually, so maybe that is the question, like how does the relationship that you form with the land and with the environment, like how does that translate to the relationship that you form with other people?
I think you kind of answered it because you said that growing food is a very communal activity. And so I try to develop a lot of different free programming at our growing operation. And so, and, that translates to, you know, um, having folks just be out there at our space. I think that what's really beautiful and powerful is like we've really built up and grown up the space. And so when people come there, they're like wowed by everything that they're seeing. They think it's so beautiful. It isn't just that they pop in and they get their vegetables. They come and they're in community for a while. And I think that when you cultivate a space like that within the environment, it also is can be very healing as well. And so you'll often will see a lot of our gardeners or volunteers, they're out there barefoot. They're out there grounding themselves, they're out there harvesting or watering or planting. And I think that that's how you kind of translate this back um to people. Like when you see them have that level of comfort within environment to where, you know, you'll hear stories of our elders that will be like, oh, we used to drink from the hose, we used to run around barefoot, we used to do this, we used to do that. But to hear it and to see it in praxis, again, that word praxis, um, is even more gratifying because that's how you know that you have achieved something that is great for your community when you have folks that feel comfortable enough to just kind of like let their whole body relax and be in that space.
No, yeah, I definitely think that I don't know, that piece just about like getting back to it and getting back to community resonates with me very deeply for a few reasons. And forgive me if I go off on a little bit of a tangent here. But obviously, like I grew up in the Kepper community, and to some extent, like urban agriculture has always been a part of our like communal like practice. I grew my parents like have a garden in their backyard, front yard, chickens, right in the inner city. And I think that like growing up, I always kind of like took that for granted just because, no 8-year-old wants to wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. to, weed your arugula beds, You just don't want to do that. Um, but I think that as I've gotten older and matured, and I think that part of this also has to do with like the work my mom has done a lot of work just like digging up our family history and understanding how that like agricultural practice is such a deeply ingrained part of my family history. So my people have been farmers for generations. But I think that you know making that realization definitely like did my thinking as well because it's like, I don't know, it made me realize how disconnected from our food we've become, you know? Uh that even my family who has like a long lineage of growing our food, growing other people's food, you know, I don't like I didn't even know that. I wasn't even aware of that. And I think that I don't know, I think in a lot of ways that education um, and I think also like reframing Black people's history, I think is important as well. Just because I think that, generational trauma from slavery caused us to have like very negative associations with farming and agricultural work. Um, but I don't think I think what I've come to realize is that like there is nothing inherently wrong with that type of work. It has more to do with you know I don't even know. Maybe it's just the, I think obviously just like the position of servitude, is one thing, but I don't know. I think again, tangent. I think I've gotten off the rails a little bit, but um I think like my biggest reflection right now, just from like what we've talked about so far, is just like how important that connecting back to the land and where our food, which is the source of like all of our life, comes from, how important that is to like, building and maintaining like your community fabric. Like, does that make sense? I don't know. I don't know if there's a question in there, but if you have anything to say, I'd love to hear it.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And those are some of the things that I'm trying to drive through our growing operation as well up here in the north, where we very much are almost restoring. Not only are we working to revitalize our, or I should say, rekindle our connection to the land, we're also restoring and revitalizing what may have been lost in our community fabric. We had, we have a lot of our elders that migrated from the South during the Great Migration from Mississippi, who grew up on farms or grew up in a rural area. And so, and yes, you are very blessed and fortunate because, again, like I said, you and your sister, y'all were tiny tots when y'all came into Kepra. And so, folks like myself never had that type of foundation. And so, we have to go through this whole decolonial like praxis to come back and retie ourselves or rekindle our connections to the lands, while you guys were super fortunate to, have chickens, have a space like Kepra. And so there are so many of us that live within urban environments, living under food apartheid that don't even have the community space or seeing other folks because of like either local policies that won't allow for folks to own chickens or grow food or whatever, what have you. Like I grow food in my now I have a chickens in my backyard. I grow food in my front yard. And so I've been getting in trouble with the city, right? But I got on them recently when I got my last citation just a few weeks ago, where I said, well, I'm sorry you don't understand what's happening out here. I said I grow food in my front yard. I also give rise and I utilize indigenous growing techniques and I utilize permaculture. And so when you throw a little razzle dazzle in there, you're gonna skirt a citation, right? So, but also
Yeah.
like I'm sorry, I can't have my garden in the backyard because I don't get enough sun. I also have black walnut trees. Tomatoes don't like growing next to black walnut trees. So I already tried it. I promise I did. And I have the most sun in my front yard. So y'all either need to amend the local policies. And so that's another issue, right? Also rooted in colonialism and settler colonialism, right? The ways in which that our hands are tied in some of the urban environments. So we're trying to give
Right.
rise to self-determination. We're trying to be self-sufficient by growing our own food, but then you have local policies that hinder us from being able to do so.
I think that does bring another question to mind, which is, really has to do with just the state that the world is in, and we see a lot of, first of all, I think there's obviously the way that we are the way that we understand the world to be currently: food apartheid, food swamps, food deserts, just the ways that especially black and brown people, but really all like poor and lower class people are systemically denied access to food. So that's one aspect of it. But then I think, with climate change, of course, we're talking about ecological disasters, we're talking about natural disasters, product shortages and, shipping delays and all that kind of stuff that will inevitably have an impact on our food system. I think it's like, I think it was like I think it was like last year or 2 years ago that like we lost like a quarter of the world's wheat crop to drought or something like that. I may be like conflating those numbers, but so the question in that is, what is the importance of those communal land stewardship practices, those communal garden practices, as these disparities and obstacles to food access continue to, become more severe,
Um, I think that we're gonna end up, we don't know what, this election is gonna look like, right? Um, but what do they say? Like same bird, both wings, regardless of the election outcomes. Folks are not, taking unless they're on a communal level, unless they're on this level, right, where they're not taking it seriously in regards to food apartheid and how that is impacting those who are systematically excluded. Um, and so it is going to take us, communal land stewards, to get out here and basically continue to do the damn thing where, we are trying to revitalize our community fabrics. We're trying to restore lost resources and things like that. In my particular neighborhood, when I was growing up, you never had to leave our neighborhood for anything, right? We had a pharmacy, we had restaurants, we had a we had a drugstore, we had a full service grocery store with an in-house butcher, and a video store, right? Before Netflix and streaming and all of that. So, we had all of that. And our community was walkable and it was accessible. So we had resources. We were able to walk it and things like that. But it was funny when I moved back home and I was walking my dog, I realized I was tripping over the same huge gaps and holes in the sidewalk that I had been when I had learned to walk in that neighborhood. So looking at the these structural issues down to the built environment, right? These things are systemic, these things are structural, these things are institutionalized. And so it's going to take something different to really turn a lot of these societal issues on its head. And I think that is through communal land stewardship, through community-based programming to address, and just community-based solutions to address some of these massive structural issues.
What do you see? First of all, I did want to ask and clarify, if you don't mind my asking, but where are you based? Like, what area? Where do you come from? Where do you currently work?
So I'm born and raised in Northwest Indiana. And so specifically Michigan City and the Eastport neighborhood. And so my growing operation is called the Walker Street Park Community Garden. And so I've been basically the product director and like grower there for almost 5 years.
And how do you see, I guess, like the how does the local history of, if you can speak to this, of course, how does the local history of your community, I think, impact the way that you all approach your food work, if that makes sense?
So our local history, folks, you will kind of hear the same argument that, and our neighborhood is called Eastport, or, we're on the east side of Michigan City. And so Eastport has needed a grocery store for well over a decade. And so we've seen a lot of folks, retailers specifically, come and go. And again, as a part of like my learning and unlearning practice or methodology or whatever you can say, is that when some of the last retailers came in, they were just oversized liquor stores. So they had more liquor stores down their aisles than they did fresh food or whatever. And so I'll always tell folks the story of the cilantro in the dirty water bucket, the dirty, dusty canned goods. We also had heard reports of um, meat in a dead freezer and stuff like that. And so I noticed on social media, once they started saying, big blowout sale, blah, 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 I reached out to them. I said, oh, are y'all closing down? Oh, we can't speak to that yet. So I said, okay. And then I started asking them more deeper questions. Where do you guys source your meat? Where are you getting your meat from? Where are you getting your produce from? Stuff like that. Um, like I said, the inside of that water bucket looks like the bottom of your shoe. um, And so,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, but then it was blamed on the residents when the grocery store closed because we wouldn't patronize that place. Who, I mean, we would have had better chances eating out the dumpster behind the grocery store or behind the McDonald's or whatever across the street. You know, so who wants to take, like, yes, I want to eat well, but as a human being, regardless, we know like food system inequities are along the lines of race, gender, and class, right? But regardless of all of that, as a human being, I should have access to fresh, healthy, affordable food in a place that is clean and sanitary. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I think my next question, and then I want to maybe pivot a little bit. Um, going back to that point about communal land stewardship, you know, because I think that's certainly been playing around within the Kepler space for a long time. Obviously with the gardens and with the farm property, but also, we have like communal housing, and shared working spaces. And now we're coming to the end of the project where we were, in charge of setting up the Indianapolis Community Land Trust. So, I guess my question is, what is the first? I think my first question is, what are the obstacles to shared community stewardship of land right now? And then I have another question after that's more about, how do we bridge these gaps? And then maybe any like lessons that you've learned in your work that might lead us from, just community gardens and like, smaller projects to larger, to having like community grocery stores or, community farms and pharmacies and all that other good stuff.
Um, so the growth and expansion and kind of like the next phase that I would like to see our project go to is for us to start to actually bring in some type of revenue to sustain the project, but also potentially develop a worker owners cooperative grocery store so that we can also give rise to economic empowerment for residents, and also be able to have total control over the type of food that is being brought into our neighborhood, which is something that we have never had control over before. Um, my so we have also been trying to get a community land trust uh, put together over the past year. And so there's definitely been some challenges around that, specifically from folks that operate from more of a colonial lens. And, and so in that case, they're more about individual power, individual control, rather than sovereignty or communal control or communal ownership or giving rise to communal land ownership. So there's the challenge. So those are some of the biggest challenges of folks that have a shared understanding between uh, being in community and having a more of a communal understanding of why we are doing what we are doing or why we are trying to do it versus those folks that act as individuals or that individualism.
So, and then, I think now I would like to pivot a little bit more to, you know, I know uh, we're trying to decenter the institutions, but I would like to talk a little bit about your institutional work now, if you don't mind. So I think like first, would love to hear, if there's anything you haven't already shared about your garden program, what you guys currently have going on, where you're going, ways that folks can support. Maybe start there and then I'd like to maybe get into some more of the work that you're doing in terms of your degree, and, obviously the PhD isn't the end of it, but it's definitely a significant step, I think, in your learning and, development. So I would definitely love to give some room to that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are do you have any specific questions or you just want me to
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah. So
you
so yeah, so let's start with Eastport Garden. Is that the
it's called Walker Street Park Community
Walker
Garden.
Street Park Community Garden?
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep. Walker Street Park
so
Community Garden.
yeah, so let's start there. Just sort of like, skin, any history on that project that you want to give, and then, what's next? Where is it headed? And how can folks support?
Yeah, absolutely. I say like and share our content for one. And like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, which is exactly that, Walker Street Park Community Garden. And so I would like for, like I said previously, for us to start bringing in some revenue, for us to maybe even create some type of like seasonal positions for folks. And so we are going into our 8th growing season, which I think is really huge for a community garden. I often say like that community gardens have an expiration date of like 3 to 5 years, right? We know it's like touch and go, almost like a small business. So if you don't have the resources, the capacity, the whatever, what have you, to like continue on a project like that, and really it's more sweat equity than all the other stuff, right? Like folks can get the land, they can get the seeds, they can get the plants, they can get whatever, what have you, but like getting folks to consistently come every year or daily or whatever, especially during the summer, to continue doing that work, then yeah, it becomes to be burdensome. And so I'm going into my 5th season of operating this. And so a little bit of history of in regards to Walker Street is that it was through the desire of the neighborhood association at that time, which was the Eastport Neighborhood Association, that they wanted the garden there. And so by the time I came in its maybe 3rd season or something like that, it uh the neighborhood association was not in a capacity to continue the project. And so you only had a couple people that were showing up. Um, and so, but you still had a lot of residents from the neighborhood that were continuing to garden. Um, it was very much a kind of top down approach in regards to the development of the project. And so you had and then we're also are in a park system. So the park is called Walker Street Park. So hence the name of the garden. And so and I came in, I changed the name and did and a couple other, different things. Because again, we were gardening during a pandemic. And so gardening during a pandemic uh is not as challenging as you would think that it is, but we still need it. So when I originally came in before I became product director, was I came in as the education coordinator and I came in as the resident garden bed manager. So so we have our operation is fairly large. We have 32 raised beds, um, which is quite significant.
Wow.
It's so I mean we really are a farm. Like it's a farm at that point. It is large, it is big, like it's it's a farm. Only thing that we're missing is a couple animals or something, but we
You'll
actually
get
have a
there.
family. I want to say we have a family of deer, right, that live in the woods behind, so that should count for something. We can't milk them, but so um but hey, they should count for something. But again, we're going into our 8th growing season. And so this season we distributed a little less than 2,000 pounds of fresh food. And so we work with local farmers to create what's called our produce partnership program. And so whatever at the end of our established farmers market that's downtown, we we grab donations from local producers. And that program had to actually start because we were being decimated by pests one season. And so we weren't able to put out as much food as we would have liked. Um, to the residents. And we also didn't have a diversity of food either because our food was getting tore up by pests. We also tried to do like free share stacks, or share a table or whatever. And, the neighborhood kids, they would flip the table, you'd have tomatoes, everything spread all across the park. So we were losing more food than we were able to distribute to residents. So we pivoted and we created a free neighborhood farmers market, to be able to actually not only give folks like this, the experience that they don't have access to, but also be able to directly distribute food to their hands. And so we wouldn't have a lot of like food waste or anything like that. What else? You had a couple other questions in regards to.
Oh yeah, maybe just like speaking a little bit more about, I think you talked a little bit about, ways you guys would like to expand and grow. So maybe just speaking more to those pieces.
I would like to see a community level grocery store. And so this is something that we're kind of in like discussing about, and something that we can build and control ourselves. And so instead of, waiting for investment to happen, realizing that we are, giving rise to self-determination and self-sufficiency, and realizing that we are the investment. We are the investment that is already there, especially because like my family, we have a lot of legacy families that have remained in the community for, for decades, for generations. And so, we should be able to be the ones that, we have been homeowners, business owners, whatever, what have you, and we still reside there. And so like we should be able to be the ones that continue to invest not only in ourselves, but, again, giving rise to indigenous ways of knowing, being able to reciprocate or be reciprocal in regards to realizing that our future generations that are coming up behind us also need something that they can invest in as well.
And then I think maybe my last question, at least for now in this piece, before we transfer more into your academic work, um, just what are, if you any lessons that you've learned on this journey that you would, like to pass along to anybody who's maybe thinking about, running or starting their own garden initiative or communal land management initiative.
Oh goodness. There's so much that I learned. I definitely probably could write a book on communal land ownership, or
Maybe you should.
stewardship. I know. Thank you. I was recently talking about I need to start that book. Um, and so I think I will start that book. And so in regards to communal land ownership, like it that's just it. It has to be, well, there's a little bit more to that, right? It's in that it's folks have to realize that what they're doing in community and how they're doing it, and they actually have to want to be in community, right? We can't have no, folks doing solo dolo work or being individuals or even coming into the communal space and being disruptive or destructive. And we've experienced that as well. Our last season, I like to say, was our herding cat season. And I don't know why that season was just really hard. But it was. And so, and because you had a lot of folks that wanted to grandstand, do politicking, and things like that. And so there's a couple of ground rules that I feel like we want to implement probably next season, which is no religion, no politics, all of those things that you know, just can sometimes trigger folks, right? Like we're here and we're committed to a specific mission. Like if you want to do those type of conversations, go out of the space, because the space also, you have to realize that this is also a healing space for folks, right? Like this is the only green space that we have in the neighborhood that is thriving, where people can access their food, where people can be at peace, where people can put their hands in the soil and things like that. So bringing in some of those things that can kind of trigger and piss off people or turn people off, like needs to happen in another space, right? So we're on city owned land, right? So oftentimes we end up being the catch-all for when people are pissed off at their electeds. And it's like, okay, well, this isn't council chambers. We're just gardeners or farmers or whatever, what have you. And we can't do anything about, what your council person isn't doing, or whatever, what have you, because we don't have that kind of power, right? Not yet, right? Um, because a lot of that power is driven from community. But I try to let folks know, I said, hey, we got to be on our best behavior, right? Because we are in partnership with the city. And if I get a call and they're like, hey, we're shutting this project down, we don't have any other um choice but to vacate the project. And so because it is such a vital community resource, I try not to put us in those types of positions to end up, you know, um, losing something so vital.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay off the chopping block. I hear that for sure.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Great stuff. Gosh, I I do hope that, you get the chance to, I don't know, just be in our space just a little bit more, because this has been such a great conversation, but I do want to pivot into more about your academic work. We got about 20 minutes left, so I did want to cover some of that stuff before we get out of here for the night. But I think first, maybe just like a start by just like briefly outlining your academic journey, Uh 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 yeah. Yeah, we'll just start there. Briefly outline your academic journey.
So my undergrad is in biological sciences. And so I've worked in and out of like university labs as like a lab assistant or whatever, what have you. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I realized that I had way too much personality to be tied to somebody's lab bench. And so, I said I wasn't eccentric enough to stay hidden behind a microscope. And I had been a couple of years into trying to do the community gardening and whatnot. And so I realized that I didn't have enough experience in being connected to community. So I went back to school to get my master's in sustainable urban development, and worked with a really great research advisor and mentor in regards to learning all things sustainable food systems and local regional food systems. So I have a degree in urban planning. And so that's been 8 years ago now that I graduated from that program. And so I thought that community psychology would be a really great, um, uh, how do you say, connection to my work in urban planning, because I'm a non-traditional urban planner, right? So I'm very much a community planner, very rooted in community. If you've ever heard of Jonathan Pacheco Bell and embedded planning praxis, he created the embedded planning praxis, where it is basically meeting people where they are. And so have and so that's kind of been where my institutional journey has been, right? I thought, because I was more rooted in trying to understand the more structural and social issues that inform the built environment, that community psychology was where I wanted to go. Um, and then again, just continuing on my journey as a land steward has gotten me this far. And so I originally wanted to put together, again, life happened, right? And so I had entered the program, and then I had to drop the program, and then pandemic happened. And I was like, oh, um, I can do my coursework online. So that was really, and so the program became more accessible, and I didn't have to be in Chicago to finish the program. I could do the program all online, unfortunately, due to the pandemic. But hey, I think it's worked out for the better. And so um that's where I am. And
What?
so oh, I want to say, so originally I had this long high sedity title in regards to my research. And it was like, I wanted to analyze Hoosier Black farmers, and I wanted to look at a trauma informed examination of food accessibility in the Northern region. And so all of those are just really big, ridiculous, fancy words and a lot of jargon. And really, what I wanted to, I boiled it down to doing a qualitative study, which is the land access is liberation. So asking BIPOC farmers, specifically Black farmers, land stewards, environmentalists, ranchers, whatnot, what does land access as liberation look like to you?
And where did you go for for those different those different stages of your education?
So for my undergrad, I attended Purdue Northwest, a community campus, satellite campus that is extension of Purdue University up here in the northern region. I went to DePaul University in Chicago for my sustainability or master's degree, and now I am at National Louis University, also in Chicago, for my community psych degree.
Awesome. And then I just real quick I just wanted to uh ask about your undergrad. How did you get into biological sciences, and do you see that as being like applicable to your current work in any way?
It very much is. And so I actually still utilize a little bit of my training from biological sciences, especially my passion in research and development. And then also, being in part of the environment and whatnot. And so I very much want, so when I was 15, it was my dream to be a biochemical engineer. And I wanted to work for Eli Lilly. And so that's actually how I ended up coming down to Indianapolis and getting connected with Kepra, because that was my dream. And so I really struggled for like about a year trying to get employment in any kind of laboratory that would take me. And so got chewed up and spit out of the industry within, a few short months of being there. And that was the, kibosh on my biological sciences. But then realizing that there aren't a lot of Black scientists, there aren't a lot of Black
Yeah.
urban planners. Um, so there's a lot of Black community psychologists because basically we're organizers, community organizers, right?
Yeah.
Community
Yeah.
psychology to me is like community organizing with a fancy name. So
Yeah. Nas is back. Nas is a urban planning student at the University of Cincinnati. He's back there snapping his fingers.
so urban planner and Nas reach out to me. I'll definitely connect you to folks and whatnot, and share my experiences of being an urban planner in
Yeah.
this state or region or whatever. um and so yeah, the at one point I counted that in our region that there was only like maybe 5 of us at the time, and then some folks have moved on or moved out of state uh and whatnot. And so yeah.
Yeah. So moving back more to the present with your PhD in community psychology, is that correct?
Yes.
And specifically with this land accesses liberation piece, tell us a little bit about that project, how that's manifesting. Um, yeah, tell us a little bit about more about that project.
So I really have loved this project. So this project has taken me all the way down to Mississippi to my ancestral home. And so at when I wasn't really getting a huge response from farmers in our state, and then also, so I originally started, well, let me start from the beginning. So I originally started off utilizing a method called photo voice. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with photo voice, but photo voice is basically a methodology that utilizes a photo, a narrative, and kind of can be utilized in almost social justice work if you wanted to inform policy or something like that around like specific issues. So in this particular project, we're discussing land and land access is liberation. So I wanted for project participants originally to provide me with a photo, a narrative, a caption, and put it within what's called the SHOWed method. And so with the SHOWed method, it's an acronym just spelled out just like that. but it has different questions. So what do we see here? What's happening here? Why do these conditions exist? And what do we do about them? And so that's the showed method. And so some of my participant, and then the overall research question, which was, what does land access as liberation look like to you? And so I think that um, the whole methodology was a little bit difficult for some folks. And so I was trying to make it a little bit more accessible for everyone as well. And so I feel like I've gotten, and so some people participated in that kind of first iteration of the project. And but then some of the summaries or the narratives I received were kind of short. And so I reached out to those participants to have one-on-one interviews with them, to have them expand on the narratives in the summaries, because I was like, man, you know, this is good, but I feel like there's something else here that you're wanting to say. And so expanded uh on those submissions and whatnot, and ended up getting like a much deeper understanding of how those participants really viewed land, their ties to the land, you know, their, especially their physical and their spiritual connection in how they steward land, how they see land, even how they, you know, say it was like an environmentalist going for a hike or something like that, you know, how they, you know, see land as a public good, you know, and how that revolves around or public access, you know, how that can be seen as liberatory, or how that can be seen as a in a framework of freedom. Um, and so I feel like I've gotten more fruitful data by just having just one-on-one conversations. So, you know, all of the kind of institutional glamour aside and whatnot, just getting down to the nitty-gritty and having conversations like this.
And so tell us a little bit more about this focus group that you're running come November.
So I would really like to have, I wouldn't even like to call it a focus group, but maybe more so of a community conversation. I think a community
Hey, we know
conversation
about
is
those.
right. I'm gonna say this is a community conversation. So something that is like this, that
Yeah.
is free flowing, you know, kind of semi-structured, right? Like you kind of come in with a idea and you have some questions that you're kind of formulating, and just kind of having something that is more so in that perspective, and just kind of like having folks be more relaxed. I think that if you call it a focus group, you know, or whatever, what have you, versus a community conversation, it, I think it gives people anxiety, gives me anxiety, and stresses people out, right? Because you feel like you have to be so tight and formalized rather than just like having a free flowing conversation, you know, and just like, you know, hey, I think that's really good. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. There was some you mentioned earlier about um, you know, basically the changing of the title for this project, and I think in some ways bringing it a little bit closer to home. And I think that's something that we've been talking about a lot in the Kepler space recently is just sort of like the gap between, those of us who have an institutional education, the quote unquote academics and, the rest of our community, and really just like conversations around how to make that information more accessible for people, and more easy to engage with because it isn't always. And I'd be curious to hear, just like what your experience has been, lessons learned in terms of like the why and how of making these like academic concepts and projects more community centered, more community friendly, um yeah, more for the community.
I think it goes back to something I said earlier about having a shared, like a communal shared understanding. Um, and then, you know, once you get folks talking about a specific topic, it naturally, like, I think folks kind of naturally gravitate to sharing their lived experiences around that topic if they have a lived experience. And then even like even if they don't, they might ask questions that might incentivize somebody else to just kind of start being pouring outwardly. And I think that that is where you get more meaningful conversations to be had. That's why I kind of don't again, you kind of like with this particular topic, like to me it's very sacred for one. You know, a lot of the, of course, if somebody, if a project participant says that I don't want XYZ shared or I don't want certain things shared, like, but I will share it with you. Like, I keep a lot of those things to my vest, because you also have to be a trusted source in your community as well. And so, again, back to kind of like some of those best practices for communal land stewardship. You know, that's some of them, right? Um, and so yeah, those are.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Nas, you got anything you want to ask back there? Word. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. I'm trying to go for it. Yeah.
Right.
Nas
Hello,
has
hello.
one. Give him a second.
Just one question before you go. One question. What would you say to somebody that's younger, say like middle school age range, that's interested in being a helpful part of their community, maybe doing something like community garden, but no clue. What would you tell that child, or what would you tell them to get into in the next coming years?
I would definitely try to give that child like access to a community space. Um, you know, a lot of our like in my community, a lot of our elders passed. So we used to have a M or a Paul or a Miss Paulette in our community. And you know, as we were growing up, we lost those folks and we lost our access to our community space. And so I think now it's up to folks like myself and others to reestablish those community spaces and get our youth involved in these things. And so I, you know, well, let's tell the tiny tots, tell the little ones, come on, come on, let me show you how
Yeah.
to do this. You know,
Yeah.
and not be intimidating, right? They might already be experiencing that at home, at school, in their social circles. So they need other spaces where they can come and be themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a secondary question off of that, do you see any spaces in Indianapolis right now that are doing that type of work that you think you could shout out at this moment?
And also
Capra all
in
day
your
long.
own and in your own community as well. Yeah.
Capra and Walker Street all day long, all day long.
Like this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's gonna be enough for me from today. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Nas. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, yeah, it's about 7:24. Is there anything, I think I've asked everything that my brain can muster for now. Is there anything that, I didn't ask about that you would like to speak to, or, any thoughts or ideas that you'd like to leave us with today?
I think we hit everything, to be fair. I think we would be here all night. I think we would be here all night.
Yeah, we have been here talking for a while. Yeah, we have. Then in that case, I will say, thank you one more time for sitting down with us for a little while tonight, and sharing all of your, your wisdom and experiences. Definitely looking forward to, one, obviously connecting for the next conversation. I'm definitely gonna do everything in my power to be there in November. And two, all of the continued skill and knowledge sharing between our communities, man. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
of course. Of course. Yeah, thank you and thank you one more time to Nas for running our tech. Thank you to everybody watching this live stream via, our YouTube platform. Thank you to the Indianapolis Recorder. They have all of our previous Mumbo Jumbos stored on their Facebook page. And, obviously, if If you're watching this and you want to learn more about us, visit our website at www.kepler.org, KHEPRW.org. And if you would like to support our work, donate.kepler.org. Yeah. Thanks, Dominique.
Thank you guys.
Have a good night.
You too.